And so recognizing exactly your point, recognizing the real impact, the holistic impact, allows you to make decisions that are focused on, our mantra, leaving the planet in a better place than we found it. If we were just focused on certifications, we would never look at those areas because the certifications haven't really opened up those requirements and thought about the embodied carbon footprint the way that you're explaining it.
What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. This podcast is sponsored by Berman Falk Hospitality Group, a design-driven furniture manufacturer who specializes in custom case goods and seating for hotel guest rooms. Today's guest is a professional with experience in hospitality, business, administration, and law. His career has spanned retail, restaurants, and many different facets of real estate. He's passionate about sustainability and was one of the voting members of Denver's Office of Climate Action. He's currently the CEO at Urban Villages. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jon Buerge. Welcome, Jon.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
One of the things I love about doing this podcast is I get to speak to many entrepreneurs who are doing all different kinds of businesses, but specifically in hospitality, the ones that I'm most intrigued by are ones that are creating new environments, but through the lens or a major pillar of sustainability. I've spoken to many past guests who have sustainability as a core pillar of their business. And many traditional developers say, oh, that's crazy. They can't do that. It doesn't pencil out. But as the years go on, I've been doing this 4 years, and just hearing about what you've done at Populus and how you're building urban villages. And from conferences that I hear, sustainability drops more money to the bottom line if done well. So before we get into talking about why there might be people who think that doesn't make good business sense and why you're crusading against this, I want to first understand what hospitality means to you, and then we'll peel back the onion on that.
Well, I think hospitality to me is the kind of unwavering and selfless pursuit of an extraordinary experience for a guest. And what I mean by that is, as a hotelier, as somebody is welcoming somebody into your building, the focus needs to be constantly at how can you make that experience as graceful, as easy, as opulent as possible for our guests. And so there is a selflessness to hospitality that I think is just intoxicating. And I think is really, when it's done well, it's kind of that uncompromising pursuit of empathy for those that are coming in and staying at our hotels or eating at our restaurants or visiting our coffee shops.
Wonderful. And then I think what I appreciate so much about what you said there is all of these guests, I'm going to take it a step further for you, that are coming in to Populus in particular and seeing how you've created what I believe is the first carbon positive hotel. I want to understand more about what that is. But all these guests that come in, they can also become evangelists for what they've experienced in your hotel. So first of all, what does a carbon positive hotel mean to you? And how have you seen guests that come in, stay with you, and then they go on their way? What are some things that you've heard about how your hotel stays impacted how they live their lives?
That's a great set of questions. You mentioned carbon positive, and that was a term that we somewhat backed into. We started the development process of Populus with a very simple idea and a simple kind of mantra. We looked at ourselves and said, we want to develop and operate a hotel that truly and authentically leaves the planet in a better place than we found it. That was the very simple lens that we started to look at this project through. When we started to dig in to understand, the environmental impact of every element of our hotel, where's the materials coming from? How were the materials made? How are we constructing it? How are we sourcing our products? What kind of companies are we sourcing them from? We realized that that simple mantra of leaving the planet in a better place than we found it was very complex. And as we ultimately looked at different ways of evaluating our impact on the environment, we kept falling back to carbon. Climate change is a very complex process, but it really essentially comes down to too much carbon in the atmosphere. And when we burn fossil fuels and we do other things, we emit carbon, and that carbon creates an insulary blanket over the planet and creates weather changes. And so the impact on climate change can be tracked down to carbon. And most things, whether it's products or processes or materials, can be calculated. You can calculate a carbon footprint. You can also calculate offsets with carbon. When you plant a tree or you instigate regenerative agriculture, those living things take carbon out of the atmosphere and store them in the soil. And so you can track the offsetting through carbon. And so ultimately, we realized that carbon was the one metric that was relatively consistent between all impacts that we make at the hotel level. And so when we went back to our original idea of saying we want to leave the planet in a better place than we found it, we realized that we were able to not only track our carbon footprint on a whole variety of areas, but we were able to evaluate better alternatives, try to reduce that carbon footprint as much as possible. And then at the end of the day, we needed to invest back in nature to pull and remove as much carbon as we could to offset the ultimate carbon footprint that we had created. It's impossible to build anything, certainly a hotel, without emitting carbon. And so the nature of being carbon positive requires ongoing investment in carbon sequestration. So we're emitting carbon and we're sequestering carbon. We're trying to balance that budget in a positive way. And so a lot of our initial effort was in reduction of carbon. And we literally brought in our general contractor, all of our subcontractors, our design teams, everybody that was involved in making Populus as a building, and brought them in on this mission. And so in many situations, we would go to our team and say, okay, this is the original set of mechanical equipment. This is the original set of materials. This is how we're going to build a building. Now go out and see if we can find different means and methods, different products that have a lower carbon footprint, and let's evaluate those options. That process led to a meaningful reduction in our carbon footprint. In total, more than a 50% reduction from our original estimates of our carbon footprint. And those ideas and those products came from pretty unexpected sources. For example, our general contractor and our cement subcontractor did a deep dive, and they found a alternative concrete material for our structure that utilizes fly ash instead of lime as a bonding agent. A lot of people don't realize it, but concrete is, arguably one of the most environmentally damaging products human beings have ever created. And so you have to build building in many situations out of concrete. And so asking the experts, is all concrete made the same? Are there, more renewable, more sustainable materials that we could utilize? And ultimately, they came back to us with a wild idea. And they basically said, we've got a product that utilizes fly ash that can reduce our carbon footprint by over 30%. And it's never been used before in a commercial building. And so we were intrigued, and we dove in deep with our team and evaluated that product, evaluated its structural durability, evaluated its cure time, and then ultimately worked with the city of Denver.
Just so I'm clear on the concrete that you wound up using with the fly ash, is that the main component of the facade of your building, which is actually quite striking, and we will drop that into the YouTube version if you are watching this?
So the facade, the white kind of columns that come down the building are, they're really inspired by a grove of aspen trees. And so the material that we utilize for that is actually glass fiber reinforced concrete. So it is a concrete material, but it's not the material that we utilize fly ash for. The core of the building, so the main structural element of the building where, the sort of spine of the entire building was built out of traditional structural concrete. And that's what we were able to replace with this fly ash alternative.
Okay, because the facade is visually striking and something that a guest would actually interact with. But for much of the concrete pour and many of the sustainable efforts that are used in construction, they're not seen or felt or touched by the guests. So what are some ways that you've taken the Populus in particular and connected some of those environmental stewardship measures to kind of be more resonant emotionally for the travelers, and it changes their perspective or how they think about things or how they're actually choosing to stay? Like, I know a lot of group travelers from universities and businesses, they want to stay at a hotel that has sustainable initiatives. Like, how do you connect all those together?
You're touching on something that I think is an absolutely critical pillar of what we're creating with the Populus Hotel company. We're not building the most sustainable hotel brand on earth as purely an impact strategy. It is also a very real and compelling investment plan. And the key is, how do you take environmental initiatives and showcase them and bring them into the guest experience in such a way that they share in the value that we've created? We kind of joked about how a lot of times in real estate, when you think about ways to make a building more sustainable, most of those efforts are in, the insulary aspects of the facade, building, very highly insulated glass, or in the mechanical systems, putting solar panels on the roof, installing highly efficient mechanical equipment. But the reality is, if you think about a hotel stay, if you are staying in a hotel that heats its water through, highly efficient boilers and, has solar panels all over the roof, that shower is going to feel the same as a shower that is been heated by, an old, inefficient, natural gas burning boiler. And so as a guest, it's hard to share the value of sustainability with them when it's all hidden from them. And so a huge part of what Populus is about bringing the environmental initiatives, those very deep ideas around leaving the planet a better place than we found it, and delivering it to the guests in a way in which they feel like they're participating in it, and it's creating added value in their stay. And so your point around the fact that that there's a lot of theatrics in our building. It's very deep and authentic, but the way you walk, the way you arrive at the hotel, the architecture, the interior design, all of it is done in such a way that's fun and whimsical and enriching. And so the guests actually share in the sustainability mission. They don't feel like it's kind of hidden away. They feel like they're participating in it. And I think that's a really important part about how hoteliers sometimes miss the ball. If you think about some of the leading environmental initiatives in the hotel industry, it's like, energy efficiency measures. It's, don't wash your towel, if you don't use it. It's things that don't really make the guest experience better. And what we've tried to do with Populus is make that overall experience a better experience for our guests, where they feel like they're a participant in that whole process.
Okay. And if you think about when this started as an idea, Populus in Denver, you obviously build out your performas, right? You have a target, you have a budget, you're anticipating X return for your investors. How have your sustainability initiatives surprised you and increased your net operating income and increased the value of the building? Because I think that's what a lot of traditional developers are missing, that especially in this age of inflation and electricity and just fuel and everything it takes to operate a hotel. I think that many developers who really set out with the intention of sustainability surprise their investors once everything is operating and normalized.
Well, one of the easiest things to calculate is energy savings, cost savings. When you create a building that utilizes energy in a more efficient way, your operating costs are reduced. And that's, very clear that that's there. It's been true for a while. And I think that a lot of investors are starting to understand that those investments in efficient energy systems pay back over time and create more sustained value in the real estate. With Populus, I think it's a little bit different because, what we really focus on is market demand. Where is the consumer? There's a lot of data out there, but a 2024 study by McKinsey indicated that 43% of US consumers would be willing to pay a premium for a green product or experience. Bookings.com, one of the large hotel booking engines, they do a variety of different market studies. And last year they released a study that said that 83% of travelers are seeking more sustainable accommodations. So we know that there's demand for green hospitality. And we also know that the industry as a whole has been very slow to react and not really has not really responded in any sort of a exciting way. And so there's this pent up demand for something new, and there's not a lot of product in the market. There's not a lot of people creating more sustainable accommodations. And so, as a starting point, we know that there's untapped demand. There's unmet demand out there. And so a big part of this is creating a product that customers are looking for. I think the other thing that's important for us, and one of the reasons why Populus is such a strong economic model, is that eco-conscious consumer more and more are making decisions based out of trust. And you see this with a lot of brands, Patagonia being a great example, where Patagonia has invested in building brand trust with their customers. And once they establish that brand trust, those customers come back. They're very, very resilient and they're very loyal. And for us, our goal has been to do everything we possibly can do to build and operate the most sustainable hotel in America. And we also tell that story in a whole variety of different ways so that the guests understand it. And we try to be consistent and authentic and build a trusted relationship with our customers. And that creates repeat business. That creates loyalty. And we're even seeing it, in hospitality. There's something called the Net Promoter Score, where you're asking your own guests, would you recommend this to friends and family? And we're already exceeding market standards in NPS scores because our customers believe in what we're creating and there's a personal connection to it. And so they're often our biggest advocates. When we read our reviews, they're not just saying, I had a great night of sleep and my bed was really comfortable and it was quiet. They're saying, oh my gosh, this hotel is doing extraordinary things. And I just felt so empowered being a part of it. And I want the whole world to know about Populus. Like that's the kind of emphatic feedback that we're getting from our customers. And I think that for most hoteliers will see and realize that there's economic value in that. When you build that kind of a relationship with the guest, with the customer, that is a investment in the future. That's an investment in your returns for your hotel because you're building that trusted relationship.
Hey, everybody. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years now. And one of the themes that consistently comes up is sustainability. And I'm just really proud to announce that our sponsor, Berman Falk Hospitality Group, is the first within our hospitality industry to switch to sustainable and recyclable packaging, eliminating the use of styrofoam. Please check out their impact page in the show notes for more info. Hey, Jon, you served on Denver's Office of Climate Action. If I were to give you a magic wand to fix one policy obstacle in sustainable development, what would it be?
Buildings are all so uniquely different. And I think like a lot of policies, we try to, and a lot of cities try to create a uniform policy, a uniform way of addressing energy consumption or water consumption. And I think that the mistake that I wish we had a better answer to was to create more flexibility, because there's a lot of times that, we may have an old historic building or something that doesn't really fit within a certain standard or different conditions. Right now, one of the issues we're facing is we have a lot of, empty turn 1800 or 1980s office buildings that are sitting empty and that are often owned by a bank. And so if you follow those policies, are we supposed to be, refurbishing and adding new mechanical equipments and doing all these things to these buildings that are kind of no longer really useful in their current form? And so I think that the key is for municipalities and for all sorts of policymakers to understand that buildings are very, very diverse, and the mechanical systems, the way that they function, are all over the place as far as what they are. And you really can't solve this with uniform policies. There has to be flexibility and there has to be nuance to how they get applied.
Looking at hotel, like you've been involved in many different aspects of commercial real estate. Um, my bias and opinion, and I could be wrong here, but I seem to think and believe that hotels spend more on CapEx from maintenance, renovations, just keeping the thing going than almost every other vertical of commercial real estate. What do you think is holding back developers from implementing more sustainable efforts in their mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, and just the overall operations of a hotel, given the fact that they spend more on capex? Like, why aren't hoteliers converting to more sustainable measures faster? There also seem to be a laggard in the industry as well, in the real estate verticals as well.
Well, I mean, I think one thing to remember when we're talking about any kind of upgrades to an existing building, it's important to create energy efficiency. It's important to replace, less efficient equipment with modern and efficient equipment. It's also important to electrify buildings because, the electric grid can be greened up. It can be fueled through renewable. And so by utilizing electricity versus natural gas, ultimately it's a path to a more sustainable future. But I think we also have to remember that there's a carbon footprint to every piece of mechanical equipment. And so it's not necessarily better for the planet to go in and tear out an existing natural gas boiler that still has another 15 years of useful life. It's better to use those systems until they need to be replaced. And then when they do need to be replaced with more efficient systems. So I think that you're absolutely right. In hotels, there's by far the highest capex. There's the most usage. There's so many more people utilize a hotel than an office building or an apartment building. But this equipment still does have a useful life. And so I think it's important for all hoteliers, anybody that owns a hotel, to understand that, yes, you should replace and upgrade systems and make them more efficient, but do them at the right time. I think the other element is that a lot of the new equipment is new. It hasn't necessarily had decades of usage, so a lot of people aren't familiar with them. And so when you're exploring more energy efficient, more environmentally friendly equipment and various replacements, sometimes you have to take extra risk because you're trying things that haven't been used before. Like before we were talking about concrete, like we were the very first commercial building to use this particular type of concrete. That inherently came with risk. And so it's really important that companies like Populus and others are out there testing this equipment, testing these materials, showing that they can be successful, because then other hoteliers can look at that and say, okay, well, it worked there. I feel more comfortable with it now.
Um, Aparium is your management company and partner. They, how many hotels do they manage in the Denver area around Populous approximately?
Only one. So that's an easy answer for us. They have about 12 hotels nationally and only one here in Denver.
I'm curious because one of the driving factors that I'm seeing where sustainable efforts really pay off in revenue and guests and outreach is in group sales. Um, do they have any can they benchmark your group sales as it pertains to your sustainable initiatives, um, as to how it might outperform other properties that they have in other areas of the country?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the area that we're seeing the biggest benefit is the fact that we do stand out in a crowd. Populous Denver is only 2 blocks away from the convention center. Populous Seattle is right across the street from all the stadiums in the stadium district. And so there's a lot of group business opportunity. And a lot of times when these groups are out in the market, they're comparing various hotels, basically based on price, proximity, banquet space, etc. Like it's a very algorithmic process. And when you're competing in that environment, you're competing on price. You're competing on things that aren't necessarily creating added value. But with Populus, we are competing in a different way because there's only one of us. We can't really compete with the big convention hotels and the big brands, and they can't compete with us. And so we don't try to compete in the groups that aren't going to value what we bring. But when a big group, when a convention, when a company is coming into town and they do have environmental goals, a lot of companies, a lot of organizations, have climate pledges or ESG mandates. When it's that kind of an organization and we can appeal to those motivations and those shared ethoses, we stand out and we are truly one of one, and it creates a different competitive environment for us. And so what we're really learning, I mean, we're brand new. We only opened Populus Denver a year ago, but what we're really starting to understand is that we're not competing for the whole pie, but we are competing for a small piece of that pie with very little competitors in that area. And so we're trying to own that and really kind of focus our marketing and focusing our value proposition on guests that truly are aligned with what we're providing.
So I heard anecdotal stories in the past of how hotels who take on sustainable or invest in sustainable initiatives and then can fill out the appropriate documentation with the OTAs, with the bigger brands, and they get some kind of a badge or some kind of demarcation, whether it's LEED, or indoor air quality, or you name it. I mean, there's like a whole alphabet soup of badges you can get on that web page when you're looking. But I've heard anecdotal evidence in the past that universities, certain companies, um, sustainable initiatives are very important to them. So if they have offsite meetings, if they have guests coming into town, alumni events, the university or that company may steer their groups to these types of hotels. And I just didn't know if you have seen that or if that's a differentiator at all. Because at the lodging conference in Denver 2 weeks ago, it moved from anecdotal to actual real data showing that it was helping many different hotels with sustainable initiatives outperform in the group bookings area.
But I think that we're starting to build closer relationships. We've got some great universities nearby, both of our hotels. And so we're exploring closer relationships with them. A lot of what we're seeing is in the green economy, there's a lot of things emerging and there's a lot of noise. And you mentioned, all the variety of different types of certifications. Some of them are really great and some of them are, very thin. And so a lot of times, whether it's a university or the municipality, the city, knowing what initiatives are they're pushing, like LEED certification, for example. We are LEED certified, but at the same time, we're so much beyond LEED. And so there are a lot of hotels that can achieve a LEED certification that aren't really all that environmentally progressive. And so what we're trying to do is build closer relationships so those partners really understand the holistic nature of it and then can really see what we are compared to the competition. But there's a lot of opportunities there. And that's one of our thoughts as we continue to look at growing and expanding and opening new Populus hotels and new markets. We think that those strategic alignments where these organizations like universities that do share our ethos, that do really care about these things, deeply understand what we've done, have buy-in on it, and then can be great, partners for us in connecting us to customers and telling our story.
An interesting article I read a couple of years ago through Metropolis Magazine showed that even if you had a LEED Platinum building that was new build from ground up, the rent, and it lasted 100 years, the interior renovations over the 100 years of that building, if you did it every 10 years, has a larger carbon impact and environmental impact than the actual building of the building. Does that surprise you?
Not at all. There's a stat I read a little while back that said over 50% of the material of the mass in our landfills today come from construction waste. And, a big percentage of that is from renovations. We see it a lot in office space. You have a new office tenant that comes in and wants to gut the entire space, rebuild it all. They stay there for 5 years, and when they leave, the next tenant wants to gut the space and rebuild it all. When we started looking at the impact, the environmental impact of Populus, obviously a big part of it is what's called operational carbon. It's the energy we use when we turn on the lights. It's the food we source that we serve in our restaurants. That operational carbon footprint's important. But what a lot of these like certifications, LEED, et cetera, they don't really look at what's called the embodied carbon footprint. It's the carbon footprint of all the stuff, of the materials, of the construction. And what you're pointing out is when you are regularly renovating and changing things, what materials you're picking, how durable are they? What's the end of life look like when you have to throw it away? That's a critical part of the overall footprint, the environmental footprint of what we do in hotels. And, that's an important thing. Like we were looking at different carpet samples and carpet materials for Populus. And, there was a lot of really great, amazing product. But then we started asking questions about, well, what happens when we tear that out? Like that carpet may last 5 or 6 years and we're going to have to remove it. And what we realized is there's very few carpet out there that can be composted. And so ultimately that led us to a carpet product that is all built out of natural fibers. And when we do remove it, it will be composted. It will be turned back into soil and will sequester carbon into the earth. And so recognizing exactly your point, recognizing the real impact, the holistic impact allows you to make decisions that are focused on, our mantra, leaving the planet in a better place than we found it. If we were just focused on certifications, we would never look at those areas because the certifications haven't really opened up those requirements and thought about the embodied carbon footprint the way that you're explaining it.
I think I'm a lead accredited professional. I changed our supply chains back in 2008 when I did that, but I found that it never really affected the FF&E, which is what I focus on and I'm an expert in. And that was a little disheartening. I'm a raving fan of this one organization, a company called MindClick, where they do consider the embodied carbon from cradle to cradle on any new construction and any renovation for FF&E. And to me, that's just a dream come true. And I wish more people would use it and roll it out because it just creates a number, a measurement in all different areas. And then if you measure something and you see where you can improve, like we changed how we package everything. We don't use any more hard polystyrene foam. And that was like step one after joining this platform. And now we're looking at a whole bunch of other initiatives, but we wouldn't have known what those initiatives were without the measurement. What are some surprising new ways to find capital or attract capital on the equity side or the debt side as you look to expand the Populus brand into other markets? Is there a different pool of equity or debt that might want to help you develop your new projects as you look to expand? And what are your expansion plans?
We don't look at our capital needs as the main objective. We look at finding aligned partners as our main objective. So when we're out talking to potential investors, we're not thinking about them as just, we're trying to sell you on an investment. We're trying to, get you to invest in us. We're actually looking for partners that add value, that believe in what we believe in and are bought into this. But we never expect or project that we're going to compromise our investment returns. I've heard a lot of different executives talk about the importance of understanding and embracing sustainability. And I would go so far as to say in most industries, certainly in hotels, it's almost irresponsible to not be obsessed with the changing marketplace. And the changes are happening fast. When you look at the changes in consumer demand for green products and experiences and how quickly that is growing, I mean, it is right here. It's present today, and every indication is that's going to get stronger. And we think about the fact that climate change, ecological degradation, those things are affecting us personally, all of us personally, in different ways that weren't there in the past. I have 3 young kids here in Colorado, and 10 years ago, I never even really thought about air quality. But because of the massive increase in forest fires and the air quality challenges that we're now facing in Colorado, before I go for a hike with my family, I check the weather and I check the air quality. And so climate change, these things are affecting us personally. It's no longer about, protecting endangered species at the poles. That's important, but it's not personal to many people. Now, whether it is massive hurricanes, ocean rising, forest fires, all sorts of things are affecting us personally. And so as it affects us personally, we're going to, and we already as consumers are making decisions, focus on the impact of those decisions. We're making choices about where we're spending money, with a lens to how is it affecting the planet. And so, and you look at where the biggest increase in demand for green products and experiences is coming from the younger generation. That younger generation is going to be the primary driver of our economy. So if any of your listeners are thinking about building a new hotel, or thinking about a major renovation, think to the future. And the future's here today. I mean, the demand is so real. And so to not be obsessed with how can we be better, and how can we tell that story to our customers and build a trusted relationship with our customers around it, I think it's irresponsible. And so your question was sort of around the types of investors. 10, 15 years ago, there was a very niche type of investor that we would be working with. Today, that aperture is wide open because it's not just family offices and high net worth individuals anymore. It's now institutional investors because they look at the demand curves. They understand where the demand drivers are going. Where are they today, but where will they be in 5 or 10 years? And so now they're starting to realize that this way of thinking and this kind of way of doing business is actually getting in front of an inevitable change that's hitting our market.
I agree. And that's why I'm surprised that this sustainable hospitality hasn't taken off more. And part of me thinks it's because it hasn't lowered the cost of capital or attracted new um, sources of equity. But I think that is happening. I'm seeing it happen. But the other thing that surprises me is by investing in sustainable energy use and just being more efficient, it does lower your operational costs and increase the profitability of the hotel. So to me, it almost seems like a red herring why people are not pushing more into this. I know that there's different sources of debt financing. I know that there's specific institutional investors and also family office that only want to invest or more heavily invest in these types of initiatives. So to me, like all those reasons why people are not converting their hotels or building new hotels with through a sustainability lens, it's just really surprising to me. It just seems like they keep moving the goalposts, but all the reasons to do it are there now.
Absolutely. And I would chalk it up to people are habitual, organizations are habitual. It's very hard to change how we've always done it. And, the hospitality industry is a niche and, people stay in that industry for their whole careers. And if they've been developing hotels and developing brands and operating hotels in a certain way for the last 30, 40 years, these changes are happening really fast. And it's hard for organizations to adjust. And I think that's why you're seeing a lag in especially the big established brands really leaning into these market changes because they're happening so quickly and it's hard to keep up.
So with that kind of launch pad in mind of like of what you just described, and you do see the hearts and minds changing and you see the younger generations wanting this. As you look to the future and beyond Denver and Seattle, what's exciting you most about the future?
There's no bigger catalyst to change than the business world. It's easy to hope and expect government to save us from climate change and ecological degradation and mass species extinction. But the biggest tool we have is business. And I think the thing that gives me hope, it's very easy to lose hope when for 50 years we've been talking about climate change and virtually seen no change in the way that we live on planet Earth. But consumer demand, consumer behavior is the biggest hammer. And as more of us as consumers start to ask questions, what is the environmental impact of this decision? Is there a more environmentally friendly product available? Is there a more environmentally friendly experience or hotel available? The more consumers start to ask that question and seek those answers, the economy will respond. Ultimately, business is in business to meet customer demand. And when customer demand shifts, as it's doing right in front of our noses right now, as more of us are demanding better from the products and the things that we buy, that's going to implement massive changes in the way that we live on planet Earth. And so I think when I get discouraged about all the decades of inaction, I try to focus on what's changing and that change being very real and very deep and very authentic. And I think that if companies don't respond to those changes in demand, they'll get left behind. I think that's just the reality of business. And so, when I said earlier that if a CEO of a company is not, nearly obsessed with how sustainability is affecting their industry, that, they'll be left behind. And I think that is something that makes me very, very optimistic about the future.
I totally agree. And I say this often in this podcast, but I don't know who said this originally or where it's attributed to, but I've ripped off and duplicated it many times, that a waterfall starts with just one drop of water. And it's really important that you, as a pioneer in sustainable hospitality, just needs to have this continued success and keep impacting these guests. And it's so exciting to see. And there are other champions like yourself that are out there. And the more that you guys can get together and get your heads together, I think the better that we'll all be as an industry, as a country, as a planet. So I thank you for that. If people wanted to learn more about Populus and you, what's a good way for them to get in touch? And also, just let us know like how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, I mean, the best way is through our website, www.urban-villages.com. We're based in Denver. We have offices in Seattle and Pittsburgh. We're also very active on social media. We have our Populus Hotel websites, Populus Denver and populusseattle.com. There's a lot of the story about Populus at the websites themselves. But we tell our story in a whole variety of different formats. And if anybody's interested in learning more about us, contacting us, please encourage all your listeners to reach out to us through our website. All of our contact information is available there.
Will do, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience. I appreciate it. I know our listeners do as well. Thank you so much, Jon.
Absolutely, Dan. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to all the listeners, because without you, we wouldn't continue to have these incredibly enlightening conversations and learn about how business can change the environment. And it's really important for all of us to consider this, because I agree with Jon. The government's not going to save us. We're going to save us. And businesses and entrepreneurs are the best way to get these to market and to impact all of us individuals. So if this has changed your mind about how to be a different entrepreneur, hospitality, please pass it to someone else that you think could benefit from it. And we'll catch you next time.